available later if you want to share some of the components of what we've discussed here today with others. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready and share my screen and start my presentation. So we are here today to talk about PebblePad, right? And so I am here at the eLearning Consortium of Colorado. I also have the privilege of presenting some of my own concepts on Friday at 10 a.m. that aren't related specifically to the platform, but are related to equity in online and remote learning environments. So please feel free to join me for that as well. Today, I want to start out by talking about some of the philosophies that underpin the software platform. It's the philosophies that drive the development of the platform. The platform itself was developed at Wolverhampton University with faculty and students, I guess, over 15 years ago now. It's still housed at Wolverhampton University in the United Kingdom. And these are still the philosophies that underpin the functions of the platform. Number one for me, which is why it has a red arrow, is learner equity. And we're going to talk about some of the ways that this platform enables learner equity and some balance in the power dynamic for the learners in terms of co-creating their own learning experiences and learning outcomes with faculty. The tools in the platform are specifically geared towards helping learners, faculty and students, make connections across their disparate experiences, not just their academic experiences, but their lived experience in and out of the classroom. We are designed to provide very specific scaffolded learning support that can be delivered to the student and participated in again, an equitable way. And then the outcome of that reflecting and scaffolding, we would hope, and we see evidence of, is integrative learning. So integrating lived experiences, what I like to think of as making a rich soil out of all of your experiences that's useful for your future endeavors. And then assessment of and for learning. So for me, that means having assessment as a dialogue that helps develop the learner, but also develops the revision of curriculum over time for the benefit of the program and the benefit of the scholars that come after those who have had this conversation with you about their learning. So for me in the educational landscape, two of the things that I've just mentioned to you is that there are not enough, I believe, opportunities for co-creating learning experiences with our scholars, right? How are we allowing them to, well, this is a question that I use to drive most of my practice. How much do we expect our learners to be changed by the academy when they arrive? And how much are we inviting and expecting our learners to change the academy with their own lived experiences? I think it requires some balance, right? So how are we co-creating learning with our new scholars? And then how are our scholar identities, their social identities, their self-concept, others' concept of them in relation to their lived experiences? How do those impact their overarching sense of well-being? And then how can those two things actually be the foundation of the most important part of our teaching and learning relationship with them? And I'll make the argument now as we get into the platform that the tools in this platform has helped me as an educator and the dozens of schools that I support in consultancy and implementation with those same challenges in the educational landscape. So the learning journey, we call this the learning journey platform. But what I'm going to do today is show you some important milestones along the learning journey as they're identified by organizations that we support and by myself as an educator. So what we do see is the student going through this series of steps. These are not rote and they aren't necessarily always in order. But what we do see is that we need to support students from the onset. We have to scaffold the learning effectively for them, especially in remote and online environments. We have to help them manage their projects, research, deliverables, as you will, support off-campus learning, because we haven't really been on campus for a few years, and then help assess their skills and capability for their self-esteem, and then support their launch into careers and employability, and be very cognizant about the closing of their academic experience and the opening of their professional experience, if you will. And all of these components will be looked at today, how we facilitate those with the platform. You can see the blue line for me is the student. The orange line for me are the series of educators, staff, and faculty that surround the student. And in this case, what we hope to see is an increasing amount of autonomy and creativity on the part of the student and self-mastery as they go through these steps. And I do believe that what we have are some tools to support that. So the platform itself is in 3 components, and I'm going to look at each of them independently. All three components are given to you at one time, and they all have specific uses. Pebble Plus is the learning space. It's a gift to your students. It's a gift to yourself. It's a purchase that you can make for the organization that is then owned by the person that it is being accessed by. So in this case, Pebble Plus is owned and managed by the learner, and they are able to offer you assets of learning for review from within their own system, Pebble Plus. So this is where you or your scholars can record your experiences, reflect on and make connections across those. We have the ability to access scaffolding templates. I'm going to show you those in there. Complete activities, get creative. We have a fully creative suite of tools available, and keep track using blogs, activity logs, and collect and curate their work over time. So this is essentially a user-owned and managed space, Pebble Plus. That space has a relationship with the secondary component of the platform, which is Atlas. Atlas is the active teaching, learning, and assessment space. So this is a space where students can share assets of learning with you, and that learning, their learning, is made visible to you. You can offer feedback, support, and guidance in this location. You can add grades and scores that have a relationship with your learning management system if you would like, and you can have external reviewers be invited. So I'm thinking about practicum placements, clinical work, cooperative work experiences, anyone who doesn't have a direct relationship with your organization, but has a relationship with the development of the learner, has the opportunity to access this space and also review submitted assets of learning. So data and reports can be generated here, and the learning and assessment process as a dialogue can be managed in this Atlas active teaching, learning, assessment space. The third component of the platform was essential. So at Portland State University, we procured PebblePad in 2014. And as I mentioned, we have one of the most diverse student bodies in Oregon at this large urban university. And wireless access is an issue, absolutely. Even now, wireless access is an issue and continues to be an issue in many locations across the country and beyond. Pebble Pocket is an app that works even without wireless. So it's learning anytime, anywhere. Much like the Pebble Plus, you're able to record your learning experiences, reflect on that, access some templates to create reflections and journal entries, collect evidence, images, and video, share easily all of these assets of learning from your phone with your Pebble Plus whenever you do have wireless available to you. And you can also receive digital signatures from practicum placements, cooperative work, community-based learning, those sorts of things right there on your phone. So those three components comprise the essential system of PebblePad, the learning journey platform. So what do those three pieces do? Right? I mean, like we hear a lot about platform components. What do they do? The goal for me in supporting student development, digital identity management, the development of skills, the discipline-specific soft skills management, critical thinking, all of those things have a way of proceeding. So it's very beneficial to start our scholars in a way that is a little bit more lightly prescriptive and supportive so that you can help them build the skills they need to be able to collect, curate, reflect upon, and make connections across all of their learning experiences. So the platform allows you to go from highly prescriptive at the beginning with a student and guided to completely and fully creative by the time the student exits their experience with you, program, course, that sort of a thing. And in between, the system offers all of these amazing tools with pedagogy underpinning them that helps the student begin to master the concepts of collecting, curating, reflecting, making connections across, and becoming more adept at showcasing their own skills and increasing their self-esteem over time and articulating succinctly what it is they're learning and the value of those things. So one of the components of Pebble Plus is the ability to collect and curate, as I mentioned. This allows you to get structured and organized. Every person who has a Pebble Plus has an asset store, and it is full of all the things that you have created. They belong to you. They're your assets of learning. In our Pebble Plus store, every asset of learning has a very unique icon. It tells you if what you've created is a blog, a page, a portfolio, a workbook, template, a talent, a reflection, so that it's easy for the learner to start to categorize their learning experiences when they're generating assets of learning. But very important to me after 20 years of ePortfolio development is that you have to have the ability to also bring in additional assets of learning. These could be things you have submitted to an LMS. This could be things that live in a OneDrive, a Google Drive, a Dropbox, another PebblePad account. But any digital file can also be uploaded into your asset store to increase the amount of assets you're making connections across and expand the ability for you to provide evidence for the claims you make about your learning competencies. So any file you upload also has a unique icon that goes along with it. And in addition to that, we have a tagging feature. So there's a metacognitive approach that allows the student, when they create a thing or bring a thing into their private learning system, to be able to categorize that in a way that makes sense to them. They can collate these in collections, they can share them through in portfolios. They have this wonderful opportunity to make sense and organize their own learning according to their own concepts. So any file that is put in here can be tagged with multiple files. You can deliver a support for a student with a tag that has your class number on it, but they can also add additional tags, critical thinking, place-based learning, those sorts of things. So that making sense of the system is their unique responsibility, as opposed to you taking over the power and control of that sort of categorization and recall of assets of learning. So, as I also mentioned, in the system, you have this really unique set of tools that allow the student to get creative. So many of you are familiar with a portfolio. A portfolio is a wrapper for lots of web pages. You can create a collection, as I mentioned, of any assets of learning. That whole collection can be shared through. For me, a good example of that is something that is potentially untranscripted. Could be all of your work around sustainability over a 2-year period of time. Those can all be collated into a collection and shared for a digital badge, for articulation, for credit for prior learning. So it allows for a real dynamic way to submit your assets of learning for review. You can also create an activity log, which allows for you to count down the number of hours or points towards a goal and receive feedback on the evidence that you provide during those experiences, and show that you're achieving specific status towards goals. And then the blog, which is an amazing blog feature. The blog in PebblePad allows for you to create an ongoing blog or a collaborative blog and make any single post private or public. So I could have 27 posts, but I only have 3 available for review by my peers or my faculty partner. So it's a really interesting way to negotiate the components of a blog in terms of privacy and security. So as I mentioned, and portfolios are now in use at over 70% of higher ed organizations in the US. My dissertation work focuses almost solely on the implementation of innovation in higher ed, mostly around ePortfolios. PSU is in the first 2% of portfolio users in the United States, and now we find ourselves in great company, about 70% of you all. So portfolios are in some ways self-explanatory, right? You want to be able to showcase the capability and creativity of your students with those. And I will show you a few here. These are my students. For me, there's a litmus test, right? If a platform is indeed usable, students will use it on their own. And for me, after going through at least 15 platforms in the last 20 years, for me, if a student is generating their own creative use of a platform, it means it's user-friendly and it has meaning to them. So here's one of my students talking about interior design. We have students who are doing a student's choice portfolio. That's pretty cool too, right? So this is a student who is talking about work-life balance. This is a student who didn't get the promotion she wanted at Starbucks and used the system in order to make the case that she should and did. This is a system or a portfolio where a student is providing support about stress to other students. Rollerblading in Oregon, right? A professional portfolio for a business degree major, finding healthy ways to deal with stress. Again, a craft club for women over the age of 50. Okay, that's fantastic. Keeping it green, viticulture, talking about mental health issues, and then just in general, providing an overview of who you are as a leader. So those are some really pretty examples from inside the system. But beyond the portfolios, right? Beyond portfolios, and because of the want of students to be able to showcase their authentic identities, support that with evidence, support that with reflective content. After teaching showcase portfolios and trying to help the school to career transition for an extended period of time, I found that we have not been doing our scholars much good by not offering them the opportunity to master those skills before they get to the point where they have to suddenly create a very stressful overview of who they are and what they've been doing for the last 2-4 years, right? So we needed a system that would provide guidance to surface learning skills all across the program, the course, the degree experience. And that is where the additional tools in the system come in very handy for the support of that process. I like to think of it as a folio thinking process, right? Habits of mind. So not only can the students build the portfolios, but the system has a series of inbuilt templates that are ready to go. You pop them open and you complete those, and those become an asset that points out a specific experience or point in time in their learning, surfacing that learning. Here's an example of our meeting record, our activity record, and just kind of our overall overarching custom sort of template that you can create for your student. So in the system, we have things like what, so what, now what, structured reflections, the STAR technique, SMART action plans, meetings, journal entries, experiences, competencies, and more. So those are all available to you as the faculty to encourage your students to use, for you to use to surface your own learning for professional development, and for them to gather on the Pebble Pocket or in their Pebble Plus store at any time to support the reflection on the learning and orient themselves to future actions. So in the same way that a portfolio is a wrapper for a lot of web pages, that early prescriptive guidance that you can provide to your students can take the form of a learning portfolio. That learning portfolio is a workbook, which is a collection of custom templates. So portfolio, web pages, workbook, custom templates. Each of the templates can be our inbuilt templates that we provide to you, or custom templates that you have created to support the learner in your course or program or degree. Each one of those templates supports reflection and it gathers evidence. So it also generates reportable data. The students are participating with these workbooks and they're being submitted to Atlas. You can actually look at their progress over time as they work towards the goals. The student retains all of these assets. They own them all, and you have archival copies to refer to in your own Atlas workspace. So let's take a look at some of the examples around scaffolding that learning journey that we looked at earlier. So we want to provide workbooks for structure and organization for the student. This is where the student is able to rank their own developing concepts of competency and talk about their knowledge in an area. You can do pre-term learning or pre-program learning, midpoint, and the student is able to talk about how they feel about their skills, provide evidence of those skills. You can have a conversation with them around the pieces of evidence that they have submitted. So it's a real lovely way to support the learner with structure. We also want to make sure we're asking the right questions, right? So in these, we want to make sure that we're having them record and reflect on the key components that support the learning skills and competencies that we have set out for ourselves. And perhaps we're even asking the student what they are surfacing in terms of learning outcomes and competencies. An example of how this can go very right is at Portland State University, where we have a general education program that spans the 4 years, where we start with portfolio development in the very first year. Of course, one of our goals there is social justice and equity, of course, and the capturing of the human experience. So what are the right questions to ask, right? Here's an example of some generated supports inside of a workbook in a first year. So we're asking the students to reflect. We're also asking them to creatively show us the support for the experiences they're having that are illuminating the types of reflections they're providing with us around social justice. These are actual excerpts from one of our first year portfolio users there. And so again, here you can see that we're providing some scaffolding for the content And then we're also allowing for some creative free form components from the student so that we can get this balance between prescriptive and creative, asking the right questions, soliciting the student to surface their experiences and how those connect to the larger power and voice structures that they're experiencing, not just at school, but beyond. So here we are again with the learning journey. I'm going to show you some examples of each of the components of the learning journey as scaffolded by the tools inside of it. So we are supporting students. What does that mean when we get a student in the door? Well, here is a workbook that is meant to orient and welcome students to essentially any program or school organization. You can see here we have their academic orientation, library, IT support, online skills advising, health, well-being, networking, student union, peer mentoring. So this is a wonderful way, especially for students who may be beginning or transferring into your organization, to get a real sense of what's available to them in terms of co-curricular development, student support, and acclimation to the culture of this specific academy that you may be enculturating them to, which is lovely. Then we have that next step on the journey, right? Supporting students. So how are we supporting students with their coursework, with understanding our coursework, those sorts of things? So we have the opportunity to provide all sorts of portfolio-based or workbook-based approaches to the student to help them capture their learning as they are going through their trajectory. In addition, we have that scaffolding of learning. So we want to make sure that we're providing, and here's some pretty cool examples, these templates and workbooks that help with program advising, the checkpoints of your program, meeting notes, grants and scholarships, field placements, literature and certification, employment, all the things they may need for your specific program. And then we have the ability for them to summarize their experiences, get digital signatures for those things. So it's a real seamless set of tools for that. And we also want to be able to manage projects and research. So as someone who is responsible for undergraduate research experiences, I will say that those can be highly triangulated. You usually have a faculty mentor or a discipline-specific person, then you may have a grant program or another office on campus supporting excellent research techniques. So the triangulation between the programs, the faculty, and the student can become difficult for the student to manage. In this way, they can manage their entire undergraduate research journey, selecting a mentor, narrowing the research topic, lit review methods, conclusion, all these in transparency with the stakeholders that are helping support the student to manage their undergraduate research. This is my specific workbook that I built for our undergraduate researchers at PSU, and it's been really effective in helping scaffold that asynchronous approach to research that occurs when they're all trying to get it done outside of their additional coursework. So we also want to talk about off-campus learning. As I mentioned earlier, it's happening all the time. So how are we supporting off-campus learning? We want to make sure that we have templates that are available to the student. But what I didn't mention is that if you are having off-campus learning, you have the ability to push custom templates out to the Pebble Pocket application. Remember, that doesn't require wireless. So not only can they create a post in their phone, they can create a reflection, they can record an experience, they can gather pictures and images, but you also have the opportunity to create custom templates that are pushed out for the student. This is an example of Pacific University here in Oregon. They are a PharmD program, so they have a lot of critical components that need to be completed by the student, but in the same way, we can offer field placement, lab tests, sorts of templates, anything that would support off-campus learning. So the Pocket becomes an essential part of the trio of tools that the students use for off-campus learning. So where are we now, right? We want to be able to assess skills and capability. We want the equity to be balanced between the privacy, ownership, and security of the system for the student and our ability to transparently see submissions and assess those skills and capabilities. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So we have a Pebble Pocket app. We don't have to use that for all of them. But when we're talking about being able to assess skills and capabilities, not in a classroom, especially during the last few years, the ability to record sessions where you are working with visually impaired learners, with early childhood ed, with clinical skills and capabilities, focus groups, forums, interviews, all of those sorts of things can be submitted for review. And then, of course, use beautiful feedback tools, rubrics, preset statements, and evaluations with the student to be able to provide feedback on their specific experiences. So then we also have careers and employability, right? So we're kind of going down the line with a student in this learning journey. And of course, portfolios are a very important part of that process. But in addition to that, we want to make sure we increase the student's self-esteem around what they have learned and how that can be useful in terms of learning transfer and the future value of their competencies and skills. So here we have a internship workbook, it's very comprehensive, that supports all sorts of learning and evidence of that learning as a student gets ready to launch into their career. But we also want to provide them some goals around their internships or careers, weekly tracking. We want them to be able to think about how to develop their professional network, potentially informational interviewing, how to research the workplace and field that they're interested in. So you can provide an immense amount of support and guidance to the student while soliciting their thoughts and fears and hopes for the future and helping them prepare for these conversations around future possible employers. I always think about portfolios as a match.com. If you have a bad profile that doesn't really represent you, you're probably not going to make a very good match, right? So what we're trying to do is help the scholar understand their unique skills and needs so that they can find a good match post-graduation. So dissertation, graduation, and transition. So there's some student examples on the right. These are student examples of portfolios for employment. But the one on the left is my actual dissertation. So I was able to, and this is becoming more common, submit a portfolio, multi-paper dissertation portfolio as the culminating requirement for my doctoral studies. So first one at Portland State University, but now there are a good half a dozen people coming up behind me in that way. And so thinking about portfolios as more widely used as a demonstration of overarching value for terminal degrees as well. So we talked a little bit about that assessment and feedback. What does that look like? So a student will submit any asset of learning, either created in the system or brought into the system from somewhere else. That asset of learning is sent into Atlas, into a secure workspace owned by the faculty or staff who need to review it. Or, as I mentioned before, those external reviewers can come in and look at a single student's work and provide them with developmental feedback, formative feedback, summative feedback. But you're able to, in the system, open an asset of learning, choose what you want to do. You can provide feedback. The dialogue that you have with the student about it unfolds directly attached to their asset of learning. Will stay with it forever so that they can refer to it. You will retain all of your feedback and the assets of learning and the dialogue you had. You have the opportunity to use rubrics and, again, feedback statements, freeform, any sorts of tools that you can pretty much possibly imagine, including approvals, capabilities, multi-level approvals, feedback, all of those sorts of things exist in that Atlas side of the system. Atlas, again, plays with the learning management systems very well, integrates with all of the major ones. I use it at several different organizations with various learning management systems. It's a very seamless situation. So that feedback and assessment and the assets that are submitted to you all convert themselves into these beautiful learning analytics. So not only could I receive 30 assets of learning for my students and then provide them with feedback on those, I can then generate learning analytics on the overarching set of assets that were submitted to me. And I can also generate feedback on the feedback I gave the students. So we have the ability to provide reporting from two levels. What are faculty and staff or external assessors saying? And what does that look like in an aggregate? And what are students submitting? And what does that look like in an aggregate? So we have this kind of twofold layer of learning analytics that make the back end of the platform a storyteller in very many ways. The ability to take a look at the overarching group and where they're at, the histograms, the pie charts, the ability to click through and see who are the 9% that aren't doing well, who are the 52% who are ahead of the game. Those things have changed the way I'm able to approach the needs of my learners in a class or a program. So that's been really lovely. And then I think a little dialogue about PebblePad itself. So PebblePad is in use at over 70% of the institutions in Australia, a vast majority of the institutions in the UK. We came to the United States in 2014. We are now the preferred provider for British Columbia, so have expanded our use to Canada. and have several dozen partners here in North America. Those partners in North America are supported by myself, an implementation specialist, and Dr. Gail Ring, who is our Director of Educational Partnerships, who was also an ePortfolio coordinator and has a 20-30-year run with developing reflective practice and integrative learning in the United States. So the reasons why I think we work for the company and continue to support the implementation of innovation and learner equity, overarching learner equity, is because the platform and the pedagogy is still managed and owned by faculty and students. But that we are really interested in taking a look at how we can support this new paradigm of learner equity, where the learner has more control and ownership, privacy and security over their own learning environments and space. So one of the things that I benefit from the most is that the PebblePad community in North America and beyond, this global community of practitioners, we come together weekly sometimes to talk about our transmission of practice, technical needs and supports, pedagogical approaches. We have amazing conversations about things like self-grading and learner equity and summative reviews and informing curricular developments. It's just one of the most important communities of practice I think I've ever participated in. So everyone who is a part of our PebblePad community gets the benefit of that shared amazing practice. And then of course, we have our technical support teams as well to support the function of your success and offer that global support. Working across 7 time zones is a fun thing, I'll tell you that right now. So that is pretty much the end of the presentation, but I do want to be able to have a conversation with you if you would like to ask any questions about the platform itself.
I will go ahead and stop the recording now too, if that's all right.
That sounds great. Thanks, dear.